This is what I know about our guest. He has always had a desire to work for himself, and growing up surrounded by design, engineering, accounting, and entrepreneurial people certainly helped shape his career. After working as an engineer and designer for over a decade within startups and companies like HP, Adidas, and Nike, he founded the Peterman design firm. The firm has been named one of the top design and branding firms of 2019 by Design Rush, Clutch, The Manifest, and Visual Objects. Ian Peterman, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Ian, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
My personal area of strength is managing the design flow of projects. So I really bring together a team. I grew up in the trenches doing all the grunt work and actually designing, and now my role is more managing and making sure that all the design pieces actually come together in a whole that people actually like.
Excellent. And in that area of strength, what is something that businesses don't know but should?
One of the things is that the user experience is more than just them sitting down and using your product. It's one of the things I work with clients on is figuring out the entire user experience from the first time they ever hear your name or see an ad to, end of life for that client of when they no longer are a customer of yours. It's much broader.
Certainly. And we'll dive into those points in a little bit. But you started off as an engineer and designer. So I'd be keen to hear, why is it that you think branding is so valuable, even for a small startup or an inventor?
The reason it's valuable is it's one of those long-term assets that grows in value with the amount of time and effort you put into it. And there's a lot of lost time early on when startups could spend just a little bit more time focusing on their brand and making sure they're cohesive early on.
Right.
That they either they don't start that engine going until later, when it's more expensive to do, or they've made some brand mistakes in the past and they weren't as cohesive as they should have been. And then they have to pay somebody like me to come in and fix problems rather than just building it from the ground up. And so, having that core at the beginning, and it's not, I wouldn't say, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on your logo, but put some effort there earlier on than you might think is necessary, and you'll have payoff down the road.
So when we talk about branding, most people think about logos and colors and the tagline and things of that nature. But from what I'm hearing, it's a lot broader than just that. Would that be correct?
Yeah. So what you listed off of is what I call brand assets. So those are typically tangible things that people can hold or see, but it's beyond that. It's also all of your products are part of your brand, how your customer service interacts with your clients. What's the email copy in your emails, and it's not just the sales email or the nice pretty newsletter that's always really well designed. It's how are your sales team reaching out to people. The brand is something that you can either let happen, and as you expand, especially as when you're a startup and you're a core and you have one person that's probably interviewing every single hire, you can control that pretty well without having a core laid out about how your brand should be and be interpreted and be presented by your employees to the outside world. But once you break that point where somebody else is hiring for you, you've got to if you don't have that core really set up in a way that explains to your employees, this is our brand, these are our values, this is what we are about. The reason we exist is to do X, or to provide this to these people, or to help this solve this problem. you have to make sure that that core resonates with everybody inside your company, because every time they speak, if you have an employee doing a podcast for you,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have the same brand value, they don't understand that core, they're on the spot talking is not going to be the same. It's not going to follow what you imagine. So, and that's, making sure your marketing is cohesive, and especially customer support.
Certainly.
That's
Yep.
behind the scenes, it gets nitty gritty, and you got to make sure that they know what it's about too.
And that certainly makes a lot of sense. And it seems to be fairly simple and logical on the face of it. Yet so many people tend to ignore it. And I would say that one of the excuses that people provide is that it's all a bit airy-fairy and fluffy. There's no hard data around it, and so could be relegated to the back burner as opposed to things like sales and revenue and things of that nature. How would you suggest that people go about being able to measure the impact of their branding and the impact it has on other parts of their business?
So some of them are a little harder to measure when you're a startup, so you look at like the brand value of Coca-Cola is astronomical.
Yep.
That day one, nobody would have said, hey, your brand is going to be worth X. Why don't you start tracking that today?
Yep.
But you can definitely track it in terms of customer satisfaction, and in tracking how people experience different portions of your company. So, and I think I had mentioned to you my Starbucks experience. I'm very used to one set when I walk into a store, but their tech support for their some app issues I was having was not good. And it's a strong disconnect. And so having, different survey points of, hey, we got this one section, and making sure and tracking in between, customers when they experience different portions of your company, making sure you're tracking how they are reacting to different portions. So, you can't just independently separate. And I think it's very easy for us to do is to compartmentalize and say, oh, well, we're just going to look at the sales team's feedback and look at their metrics. And then we're just going to look at the IT, and we're just going to look at support over here. And then we're just going to look at, the product immediate user feedback, hey, my thing's broken right now. Can you help me? And just track those independently and not look at, well, we had a customer who loved the sales process, was okay with the use of it. They had a couple minor issues, but we worked through it really well. And then there was, this other part, let's say deep tech support on some part that went terrible. And making sure that one person is a part of all three of those reports and all three of those feedbacks.
Yeah.
So that's one way to, kind of track and actually look at it instead of isolating those pieces out, which I think is part of the problem.
Sure. So things like NPS scores, customer mapping, and surveys and things of that nature would all contribute towards providing a bit more data towards the customer's experience with a touch point or user experience. Would that be correct? Yep. All
yes.
of which leads to, I guess, more of a cohesion in the overall experience and thereby branding of a product or a company. So it might actually help if you would define cohesive branding for our listeners.
Yeah, so cohesive branding, when I work with a client, what we do is we look at it all the way from, what is your marketing and your sales? What are they putting out there? What is the marketing material? Things like that. It's you might think of as your core brand. So as your social media accounts and your website and things like that, are they all matching that brand? What does your product look like? Physical product, digital product, doesn't matter, app, whatever it is, does that follow the same brand? Your copy and how you try to retain customers. So, what is that experience when the customer is leaving? And your core values, what are the core pieces? What is your mission and vision? Making sure that all of that is cohesive, and by cohesive I mean it's telling the same story. So those are all multiple facets, and they should just be multiple facets of a single core identity that is the company. And you can have a little tweaks, you know, if you're marketing towards B2B and B2C, which is hard to do, but companies do, they still should share very much that core feeling, whatever it is. And so that's why branding is a very emotional based process, but so is sales. You know, people buy because they like something, not because it's a calculated, you know, numbers game all the time. So having those core values helps in all of those areas, and that's what branding is making sure it goes everywhere. It's making sure that your employees understand it, and that that's how they want to behave, and that, you know, it helps filter out people too. By having such a cohesive, is you end up not having these pockets of customers that don't really fit, or employees that don't really fit, you know, your core, if you're really strong with making sure it's there.
Certainly. Okay. So I'm curious, with so many potential areas of fracture in the branding experience or user experience, what issues do you find that most businesses come to you for and ask for your assistance?
Most of the time it's when they start realizing that there's enough of a break that they're beginning to lose customers.
Right.
And so, you know, the greatest motivator of companies typically is financial issues. And so that'll come about when they, you know, maybe they do, I guess, some sort of survey of their customers, and they really chase kind of after some of their leaving customers or old clients, and they go, hey, just want to know, why'd you leave? You know, we're not trying to sell you, we just want to know what happened. And when they start getting feedback of, oh, well, you guys are great except for these two areas that are really not what I was expecting. Or companies that are seeing a huge drop off where, you know, maybe sales are really strong, the sales process goes well, everybody loves it up until 3 months into using the product, and all of a sudden people drop off, and a larger percentage than what would be expected in a normal use if they liked everything. And so those are kind of the areas where that becomes a problem, to the point where somebody says, okay, we have to figure out what is the point where people are suddenly switching, right? You know, if it's a sudden behavioral change, then there's a rift somewhere that happened. You know, if it's just slow and there's a usual taper off of, well, after 2 years of using our product, they typically move on, and that's just how it is, and that's just the lifespan of the product, then that's normal. But when you have a sudden drop, that's a good indication there's some kind of experiential rift that is not what they expected, and that's what drives people away.
So I'm curious, if they find a problem and they come to you for assistance with the whole brand experience and user experience and trying to rectify some of those problems, is there a process whereby you ensure that all the elements kind of line up? And do you start with perhaps existing data that they provide, a business would provide, that highlighted the potential problem in the first place? Or do you have a complete process that you run through independently of the business?
Yeah, so we typically try to start with their data, as long as if it's a data-driven decision on their part of saying, hey, we found an actual specific spot, then we start there, and then we go through our normal process, which, you know, we may start there, but we try to treat the business holistically and as a complete entity. And so we'll do a bit of a brief audit on all the parts, just to check. And, you know, frequently, if they haven't done, you know, any type of questionnaire or feedback or anything like that, that's the first thing that we do, is we start reaching out to people and ask them about, you know, figure out whatever that questionnaire needs to be, to ask a little bit of detail and get that user feedback. Because that's often where people are missing, is they've forgotten a section, or they're not getting that user feedback on each area from the same person. And that's the other key part, is, you know, we user test a lot, but user testing the whole process, sale to no longer a customer, is a little bit of something that people tend to skip because it takes longer
Certainly.
to do it. But the user experience is important there.
Do you find that you get a lot of responses by sending out a questionnaire to their customer base?
It depends on the customers they have.
Right.
So we do get some, if it's say a B2C SaaS platform, that we can send those out. Pop-ups inside of the online platform will work really well, but only a certain percentage fill it out. I don't fill out every survey I'm ever sent. I don't know anybody that does. So that's a good way. With more larger account based, where you really do have a rep and individual accounts with clients, and we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of users, we're talking about more relationship business, then those are actually a little bit easier to get solid data, because we can just have them have their account managers just say, hey, you're going to reach out and you're going to get this information, and then it can be an easy phone call. Where you're not just sending an email and hoping they see it and then hoping they do something with it. You can just call them and say, hey, we're checking up on your account. I have a couple questions for you. And those phone calls go much better. That is a much more solid way to get feedback. So it just kind of depends on who the clients are and what the customers are.
Okay. And are you looking for like statistical significance, or do you just work with the data that you get, regardless of how small that pool may be?
Yeah, so we work with whatever pool we get. We work with some small startups that are account based, so they might only have 15, 20 clients at the time.
Yeah.
So it's not really about how big of a data set can you get. It's what can you get and what's available to look at, and then working with what we got
Sure.
to see where an improvement can be made.
And with the improvements, are you also running through the process yourself as a customer and experiencing some of the issues that they experience, or do you, in the case of maybe an online product, monitor user behavior and make your findings or research based on your observations?
So both. We typically, my team runs through it ourselves. We run through every product, digital platform, whatever we're working with. We run through it ourselves multiple times. So we run through it in the first to get an understanding of what it's like to experience it as it is. And then as changes are made, we run through that process ourselves. So that's, something that we do just because you can't understand it and suggest good changes if you don't personally experience it. And then depending on what the platform is and if it's possible, we of course monitor changes, and if it's at all possible, we can do A/B testing. So we'll do 2 design changes and see which one works better, that kind of thing. So if it's an option, definitely we employ it as a tool. If it's not really an option, then we just run through ourselves, and we basically test it ourselves, and we'll ask them to have their employees test it as a customer and basically reverse roles for them for a little bit, which really helps. We get a lot of really good feedback from the employees that they run through typically, because they're used to running it, on their end, being either the tech support or supporting somehow, or just designing it and having them run through it. After it's been launched for a year or so, it kind of helps them go through and go, oh, there was this thing that I forgot to change in there that we actually meant to. And so you have that kind of feedback and input, which is very valuable.
Certainly. So correct me if I'm wrong, you're collecting all this data and then you're sort of mapping it out and picking out which areas would probably provide the low-hanging fruit and the biggest impact to a business, and starting with those as you work through the whole process. Is that correct?
Yeah, it partly depends on what their goals are. If their goal is to, hey, we want to clean up everything no matter how small,
Hmm.
then yeah, we start with the easy hanging fruit and then we charge through all the rest.
Yeah.
But for others, it depends on, budget, timeline, but it's also what is their goal. So there might be some low hanging fruit, but maybe there's another section that's a lot harder to fix, but it has a much larger impact on it.
Hmm.
So maybe their tech support is having a really bad system, or there's an issue there, or their branding, they're just not having, enough clients closed because there's a disrupt there. And so we look at where's really the most painful point, and if it's more of a just an audit of them saying, hey, we think there's something wrong, we're not really sure, can we dive in and see what those are, then that one, we do all the low hanging fruit because it's easy to say, all right, we're going to clean up these things and see if it makes a difference.
Sure.
But otherwise, we try to do the most painful point possible first, even
Right.
even if it's not the easiest, because it tends to help clean up, other issues that, when you fix that one big big obvious one.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could give us an example of one of those issues and walk us through how you've solved it and how the business knew that it was uh, project done or project completed.
Yeah, so we worked with a robotic company on one of their products, and so when their product was getting produced, but they had issues with how people interact with it. And so even though it's a physical product, their whole premise was everything was easy to use
Uh-huh.
except this one product. And so, there's this user, they had other products out there and they were being sold and they were selling really, really, really well. And this product went on the market. It sold really well initially, because they had a lot of brand loyalty and people knew and expected a certain level of ease and quality and things like that. And so when that tapered off and people stopped selling it, they kind of given up the idea of doing surveys because they were solidly built. They had an expectation that everything they put out was great. And so when this one product didn't do so well, they eventually went out and started trying to ask, like, okay, well, why aren't you guys buying this product? It does more things than these other products. What's the deal here? This should be, not our flagship, but definitely nowhere near the bottom. And that's when they started getting some feedback of, well, it's not like any of your other products. It doesn't have, the features that we expect on one of your products to come out. It doesn't have it. And so, unlike the iPhone being able to remove the headphone jack, they weren't that powerful. They couldn't force that change.
Yeah.
And so they found that out. And so they came to us and we worked on figuring out how to we ended up redesigning the product and changing the feature list on it because their clients, they didn't want to go out and find a whole new client base. So
Yeah.
they eliminated that right off the bat and said, no, we don't want to have to go find a whole new client base just for this new product. It's going to actually be cheaper and easier for us to modify it and, put in the features that they had. And so with that problem, it was just making some design tweaks. And it wasn't that much. We changed less than 20% of the whole design.
Mm-hmm.
And, those changes, put them out, and we went through a process that they hadn't done, and that was involving their customers in the changes that were happening. And so, we did these concepts, got it designed, made some prototypes, and went and had the prototypes sent to the customers that had previously refused to buy it and said, okay, well, we actually want your feedback on it. What do you think about this new product? And so doing that process, they actually regained a lot of some of their lost trust that they had with their customers just by involving them in that process. And then in the end, they had feedback from actual customers who were actually going to buy the product. And they said, these are the things we want to change. If you can make these changes, then we'll buy more of these than your other products because it fulfills all of these needs. And so we turned the product around basically and said, okay, well, here, this actually matches your market now. And so they just hadn't done those steps of really market researching, making sure their product matched their brand. Because if they had looked at anything else they ever designed and referenced it, they would have said, wow, this doesn't match. This doesn't do what we're promising. And our brand promises super easy to use. Like, instruction manual should be very short, few pages, not a thick book to understand it. And they kind of skip that. And for whatever reason, those, I don't think we ever delved into exactly why, but those could just be, hired a new engineering team, and that engineering team hadn't designed any of their other products before, and kind of designed in a box and didn't match it. And so, so it wasn't a huge change. 20% of our products, not too much. So, and that turned it around.
Certainly. I wonder what it would look like for something a bit more intangible, like tech support.
So something with tech support, for example, we work with a company that their support team, it wasn't really their support, it was kind of their back end wholesale support. So they're selling in the CBD market, and their wholesalers they would buy for a while, and then they would kind of disappear, and they just wouldn't order anymore.
Right.
And so they were kind of in this constant churn of having to find new wholesalers for their product. And they eventually they weren't sure exactly what was going on. And so they reached out to us. And so we went through what their normal SOPs are, like, how do you actually handle these wholesalers? What does that process look like? And it actually just came down to, they were not, the communication style between the sales team and, okay, well, now you have an account manager, was completely dissociated. So they were very different groups of people with very different views and very different communication styles. And so they'd get somebody on sales, and that worked really, really well. But because they did this transfer to somebody else who was not the same, they were just not happy with what they considered the level of customer service. So they would order the few that they had told the sales, they had signed the contract saying they would order X amount from the sales guy, and it's, breaking contracts is usually painful. So they made those orders, and then they didn't reorder.
Right.
And they didn't have anything in place of, while somebody was working with them, to ask him, hey, how's it going? How's the product? How are we doing? Is there anything we can do for you? And they just didn't have that dialogue. They were a bit of a startup, so they didn't have the experience and the processes in place yet for that. And so that was just kind of them learning that they need that feedback loop. And because they didn't have the feedback loop, they were at a loss. And so their sales team was just trying to keep things afloat very actively, not knowing they were getting sunk on the back end so much.
Sure. So just listening to that, I wonder if companies should actively be having customer success teams as opposed to your customer service department, the sales department, and so on and so forth, when there just seems to be so much potential to have a fractured experience when you've got siloed teams.
Yeah, and especially when you're account based, the idea that you get handed off multiple times in a sales process is a bit of a turnoff. It's when you talk to the first person, and they're great, you connect really well with them, and then you get handed off to another person, and then you find out that your actual regular person is some other person that you've never even talked to or heard of until at the very end. It's definitely a disjointed process, and every time you have a handoff, it's a risk point for not translating things well. And it's even with good CRM tools and things like that, where all the written data, you still have the human factor of, well, did the first person write all the notes down properly? Did they get the person's name correct? Did they want to be called a different name? Things like that. And I've gone through the process, and I've I've talked to someone and then someone will call me Peter. And that's not even my first name. That's the half of my last name. So when that happens, because somebody doesn't write a note or write something down properly, it's definitely a place that can easily become a problem.
Yeah, certainly. So we've talked about elements of user experience, brand messaging, and just making sure that the elements of that experience and messaging, both the tangible and intangible aspects, all sync up to be consistent to an account or a customer. Are there other elements that we should be thinking about when it comes to cohesive branding?
The other area is probably in product delivery has come up actually recently. I was talking to somebody else about this, and product delivery for physical products, it's easy to imagine. It's, the packaging that it comes in, that, and how does it ship to you. But it's also for digital products. When you go and you order something digitally, what's the email you get that says, hey, you got it. I was just talking to somebody about, they use Infusionsoft, and it's pretty hard to find some of the settings in there. And so when you sell a physical digital version, making sure that the confirmation email doesn't say your product has been shipped when you're getting a digital version, because it's really confusing. Yeah. And so making sure that those experiences are cohesive and things are clean in that area is very important, because it's, how your product is presented when you're handed the product is a very strong indication of how they're going to be treated and handled the rest of the time. So you can do a great job selling somebody, but if your product presentation on delivery is not good, their faith drops significantly.
Would you say that there is a place for having offline experiences in conjunction with online experiences, especially for SaaS companies?
I would definitely say that there's some areas, depending on what your markets are. So, if you're going after larger companies, you're going to, say, conventions and things like that, then you're having a physical sales team be present. Your presentation, if you have an amazing trade show booth and your product is okay, you're going to lose a lot of people, things like that. And if you're a boots on the ground kind of sales force of actually walking into companies, making sure that experience, whatever that is, because that's definitely the first, you can never have a first interaction of any kind twice. So, it's certainly SaaS companies need to focus on their digital, because most of it is digital. But if it's account based and you're doing any kind of physical interaction, or, if your SaaS product is for a specific physical product, what is that interaction? Is there an app? We don't necessarily think of app interactions as being physical, but that I can touch any part of the surface of my phone. So thinking about, where do people have to tap on it, is a physical thing. So you'll have great designs that I have to actually put my finger in and touch the different parts. I can't just use it one-handed. So you have to think about that experience as well. It's like, what is the device that people are going to be using this on? How do you make the physical part of interacting with your digital product as good as you can? I mean, obviously you can't control which laptop they're using, whether they're sitting on a train station or in a nice comfy chair, but you can make it as easy or as friendly as possible to as many possibilities that you can think of.
Okay. When it comes to a cohesive user experience, what would you say? I'm just imagining that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of potential elements that we would need to consider depending upon the product or the brand.
Yes.
But what would you say are the main elements that we absolutely must have, irrespective of the size of the company or the product that we must cover? in order to ensure that we're, let's say, 50% or more of the way in terms of making sure that our product is going to meet expectations?
Yeah, so I think the major areas that should be looked at is, your whatever your initial type of outreach is. So in terms of user experience, what are the sales tactics you're using? How are you getting new customers? And whatever that is, looking at that and how that process is, looking at what that transition is between, hello, new customer, are you interested? Yes, here's the product. How do you show the product? Does a photography on your website, or the screenshots, or the demo that you use, how does that relate? What does that tell people? If you have a demo and you want to look at, what is the dummy information inside that demo? Because that, if it's really great dummy info, then that'll provide one relation than others. So being aware of all of those components, and then what's the product delivery like? Is it you get the product delivered and then there's a phone call with an actual rep that checks in and says, hey, how's it going? Did you get it? You have any questions? What is that experience going to be like? And then the actual product, the part we typically focus on of, well, here's the product. How do people interact with it? How are people going to use it? Where are people going to use it? Is this something that's going to be phone based? What is that experience? Making sure that that's cohesive. And then, what is the support on the back end? Somebody is a customer. What are they going to experience in terms of adding new products? How are you going to interact with them and say, hey, we're launching a new product, or upselling on things, or support for issues that they have? And then what is your end of life? We are very focused on don't lose any customers, put as many blocks up as possible, don't let them leave, give them as many deals as possible. But unless you're an aggressive brand, you probably shouldn't aggressively try to keep your customers attached to you. So it's figuring out at what point does your brand need to let go of them and just say, hey, go do your thing. If you want to come back, come back. Making sure that last experience you very much have control over, making sure that matches your brand just as much as the first experience. And then making sure your internal team is following whatever those core values are of your brand, and making sure that they all know what they're here for, what's the point of the company, and making sure that that's all cohesive together will create the experience that, I as a customer, when I start talking to you till the time I no longer use the product, I'll have the same part. And as you said, there's thousands and thousands of other minor details under all of those.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in your experience, would you say most businesses struggle with engaging their existing customers? There's all this material and advertising and things that go on to acquire new customers, but once they have the customer, they perhaps struggle with engaging them on an ongoing basis, other than perhaps, say, within the app or product itself.
Yeah, there is definitely a discrepancy in the amount of information and thought that we put into acquiring versus keeping, nurturing, and helping our current customers. There's definitely this sell, go get new customers. That's what you need to do. Daily grind, whatever, all these things that we talk about. And the reality is that we should definitely focus a lot more on how do we make sure that the customers we have a amazing experience once they're on board. Because it's, despite all the studies showing this, we tend to still ignore it. But, people that have already purchased are more likely to buy more of your products than trying to go find somebody new. And they're your biggest advocates. They're going to go tell all their friends if you provide an amazing service. Most of the SaaS products I use were referred to me by multiple people, and I've ditched all the ones that were okay and I was making work.
Right.
So yeah.
Sure. So if that is the case, then surely more attention should be placed on nurturing and retaining and engaging your existing customer base than the acquisition part, simply because if you turn them into advocates, as you've experienced, then your marketing and sales processes become a lot less expensive, and
Yeah,
it certainly affects the bottom line as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, are there examples of companies that you see doing it really well?
Yeah. So one of them I use is Zapier. I use them for some automation pieces, and the whole experience so far, their tech support has been very quick. It's been very well thought of, and they've taken care of the few issues I've had. It's also one of the systems where I have the least issues. I've probably contacted their tech support only twice in the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're one that they so far, from my experience, they have it put together pretty well. And I'm trying to think of another one. I use Asana for project management.
Mm-hmm.
And their support has been great. It's been a cohesive experience. And another one that I just remember that they're really good is Gusto. So they do payroll. And because it's payroll and taxes, I've contacted their support quite a few times in making sure things are working right. And they're always immediately responsive, very helpful, very polite. They talk the way that they actually communicate, because I typically do their little chat box.
Mm-hmm.
And half the time I think I'm talking to the person who wrote the copy on their website, because it's so written in the same format and the same wording and the same language. And so there is no discrepancy between the person I talked to, initially in the sales, figuring out if they were the right one for us to switch to, and their support ongoing and their product. It's the feel of it has not changed during any part of the process.
With any of these products that you've mentioned, do you find that they providing value or education on an ongoing basis that you've come to appreciate?
Some of them, a couple of them do put out some form of newsletter. Their process is more, I guess there's some educational, but mostly their stuff just works. So there's not really, I didn't find any of them required a heavy learning curve. So they definitely kept their design has been very focused on ease of use with minimal instructions. And especially with Gusto, the way they kind of handle it is they do have a bit of a help forum, but instead of burying their contact, so trying to get a hold of a person, instead of having to dig through a bunch of windows and finally get to the one link after you've done your required searches in their forum to get their info, there's a button right on top that you can immediately get support really quickly. And so making that experience easier to get a hold of a real person is definitely something that they've used to set themselves apart from some other SaaS companies that definitely do. I understand the logic of why you want to kind of push people to your forum and get them so you don't have to have as much tech support. But I've also left a couple platforms because it was so hard to get to a human. And when you hit those points where the forum isn't going to do it, you need somebody on the back end to actually do something. It's extremely frustrating if you have to click through 15 things to get to that link.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Would I be right in saying that, therefore, ease of use, the fact that I can contact someone in the company quickly and easily, and the fact that the product actually works, 99% of the time, are probably the three key aspects to any product or service that absolutely need to be nailed down if you want to have a cohesive brand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And in your experience, what would you say? I mean, I know we've touched on a few things already, but would you say there are any other major things that pop up as fracture points in the user experience?
One of the other areas is definitely in delivery versus, and this is more for physical products, but delivery versus actual product. So a lot of companies, they like to skip on the packaging and shipping and try to save a ton of money there.
Right.
And it's funny to me because when you buy an iPhone, it's $1,000 phone, and the packaging probably costs 30 to 50 bucks. So, it's a good margin there that's dedicated just to the packaging, and it makes the user experience something that it's people enjoy opening the package. So, whether it's a physical package or an email, the email shouldn't be if it's one of those dry ones, I look at it, I don't even think about it. The ones that have a little bit of humor or, something in it that makes it so that reading the email that confirms that I just purchased, it makes that experience enjoyable. That's a missed opportunity in my head, because it's another opportunity for people to associate joy and good feelings with your brand. And that's really the missing component. Is when you're building your brand, you want to build those associations. That's how you have a positive brand. That's why we do commercials with smiling children instead of unhappy children to promote our products, right?
Yep.
That's definitely, and so that break between product and delivery definitely is an area that's really missed a lot.
Sure. Excellent. So obviously branding needs to be involved in the whole user experience side of things. At what point should they be involved, and how would these brand experts go about ensuring that everything syncs up with the overall branding themes and guidelines?
Yeah, so when branding begins, it really needs to begin very early. So typically with a physical product or digital one, as soon as you've gotten to the point where you have a prototype, where the mechanics behind it, the code behind it that's going to make it work, you understand what it needs in terms of what we think of like engineering to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Branding needs to begin right at that point, because the rest of it is figuring out, well, these are the engineering specs, these are the requirements to make it run. It's going to do these things. The rest of it is user experience. And even in product development, product design, industrial designers, the people who do all the fluffy design work after engineers or before, it is about user experience. And so when you have different teams, and you can, a lot of people, they hire two separate companies. They'll hire a product design company and a brand company, and those two companies don't talk. Yep. And so you'll end up having, whatever your product is, will have one brand, it'll have one look and feel to it, and your company will have a totally separate one. So making sure that it needs to start early, and you need to, if you are working with separate firms to do different pieces, or you have separate divisions in your company to do it, is making sure there's actual cross communication between those, and making sure that branding and marketing and engineering all talk and interface, because it gets really expensive when you wait to the very end to decide to redesign your product to match your brand or rebrand. And so I say as early as you can, and at the very least it needs to be when you're prototype ready and you're starting to say, okay, we're in beta, or we're really testing this product and making sure it works right. Make sure the branding goes in before you start finalizing that product.
Sure. And if a company were to do that, is there a chance for some elements of the branding to fall away as time goes?
Yeah, you can always go back in and make tweaks to help realign them later.
Hmm.
That's that's what almost all of our redesign and rebranding projects are,
Okay,
is
right.
um, getting it to a certain point. And there's the short-term payoff is it costs less to just get things to market as quickly as possible. There's definitely the drive
Hmm.
to, okay, well, we need to get this launched, we need to get cash flow, and our investors need payback at some point.
Yeah.
But it really is just a cost curve where it costs less to do it now, and we can do it, but it'll cost more later. And so there are times when a project may need to launch early, but it's also, if you keep it as a beta or something, in that stage where it's a known to be a changeable item, then you don't lose the brand power that you build. But if you launch something and you say this is the final product, and it's not actually the final product, it hasn't gone through the entire process yet, it's not cohesive with everything, then you run the risk of having people really really like that, and then when you rebrand or adjust to make the design, make everything cohesive,
Hmm.
losing customers who really loved that version and thought it was the final and so bought into that. You run that loss risk there with that happening. Whereas if you keep it in a, hey, this is a beta, this is an alpha, this is an early, this is a prototype, you kind of keep things in a looser state and you don't solidify yet, and that gives you a little bit of leniency
Hmm.
in terms of launching. And it's a good way, it can be a really good way to garner initial support of a product and even early customer feedback of saying, hey,
Hmm.
this is a beta, this is not a final product, please take a look at it, check it out, give us your feedback. And that can be a great, I mean, the gaming world does it really really well, and I wish that other places would do it as well as they they do.
Hmm.
There's alpha, there's beta, there's sign up, there's pre-release, there's so many stages for a video game coming out, and it's because they value their user base so much, and they know that if they release something and it's not right, they're gonna get screamed at, yelled at, bad reviews, and it could tank. And that's
Yeah,
really bad because they only make one every couple of years. So
certainly.
that same attitude needs to be taken. And if you want to do that and release it early and make it known that it's, this is a beta, this is early stages. We want your feedback. Don't expect this to be the permanent product.
How long should companies look at keeping their product in beta? Because it seems to be a very comfortable place to be at times, even though you say you want your customer reviews and feedback and all the rest of it. At what point should they go, okay, it's time to move on?
Yeah, it can be a very comfy chair to sit in. Usually, it depends on the product, but if you're in beta longer than 6 to 12 months, that can also start sending a signal of you don't know what you're doing or you can't make up your mind.
Hmm.
And so typically you want to keep it in that under 6 to 12 months range of getting feedback. Because the other thing is you should be, if you're not if you need to be actively getting feedback. And so if it's taking you longer than that to get enough feedback, then your customer base is probably really, really small.
Right.
And you should be looking at that portion of it. Well, what's the customer base? Is this going to be a problem, or do we have enough interest in it? And kind of make that call of, okay, well, what do we need to change because we're not getting the user base we're expecting from it. But
Certainly.
yeah, definitely avoid the hole of sitting there comfortably for too long.
Mhm. Would it be possible to create, via your initial user experience and branding, a bit of a tsunami effect in terms of driving users, signups, and your initial customer base?
Yeah, in terms of building a solid brand and driving a huge amount of sales.
Yep.
Yes, it's branding and getting your name out there is a process. So you definitely want to build that, and you do that by doing things like SEO, and you do that by having social media and putting content out there. And there's definitely an art and a science to building that up. It's figuring out where are your customers, who are your customers, how you're going to do it, and figuring out what that plan is before you even start to launch. So, making sure it's like what people do on Kickstarters. It's the same thing. Your launch date's going to be X, but you really need to start 6-12 months before then, getting out there and telling people, hey, we're launching this. This is our product. Getting people involved, making sure people know you're out there. And so, a tsunami doesn't ever, it starts underwater and you don't notice it until it's here, but it's been there the whole time. And that's the same with any product launch. Is you surprise people, and people will be like, oh wow, where did this come from? I didn't even know it was a thing, and now it's this huge thing. And that happens because you did a lot of work for the last 12 months that nobody really knew about, and you just built it up and to a point where now you have recognition. Now your Facebook ads and your Google ads are getting recognized by people,
right.
And your social media accounts have more than 1,000 people looking at it, and you have people on your newsletter that are actually going to stay, and they're not just going to sign up and drop off. And so you can definitely build that tsunami coming for a launch, but it takes a lot of back end work that nobody sees, and then all of a sudden it's here.
So just considering that scenario, it would imply, at least to my mind, that there is a significant amount of educational type branding work that needs to be put in place in order to build that awareness and certainly that list of people that you can depend upon and know or engage enough to act on your call to action to sign up to your initial beta, for example, and also spread the word to others. Would that be correct?
Yeah, it definitely, building the brand, you want to be creating those core, who are your fans. You don't want just customers. You want absolute diehard fans of your product. And so, a lot of that initial work is done with building relationships. What kind of marketing are you going to use? Do you need to use influencers on social media? Is your product based on that? Is that your target market? And so there's a lot of strategy and planning that, before your launch, when you're thinking of, you got your launch date in 12 months, there's this planning phase of, okay, well, here's all of our strategies. Here's all the options, and we have so many now. There's so many social media platforms. There's so many ways to advertise. There's so many ways to share with people, and we have such a huge and growing amount of digital. And we also have, what we call old school. Mailers still work. It's surprising, but it works. So, building those early people is also a lot of relationship building. And it depends on what the product is and who you're going after. If you're going after bigger companies and more account-based projects and work customers, then, really phone calls still work. That's, building those relationships and finding those people that are going to, you can share early stage information with and say, hey, this is what we're building. This is what we want. And getting their feedback and getting their buy-in, and in the end, having their support, saying, hey, we need your help in launching. Are you interested in this product? Would you buy this? And getting that as early as possible is definitely key.
So with a project that you would undertake, what would be the best way for a business to say, okay, if we are to fix up product delivery, this would be the tangible outcome that we would work towards. How do we decipher what that outcome is? Because quite often, at least in my mind, a business would know that they have a problem that affects their bottom line, but not quite know what the problem is and what a fix actually looks like.
Yeah, so typically what we do is if it's not a known, if somebody doesn't come to us and say, hey, we need problem X fixed, can you fix this? We do a bit of a discovery. And so we go through a discovery process of, okay, we need all your data. Now we got to spend the time going through your data. We need to see if there's additional research that we need to do. So there's kind of this first stage there that is like, hey, we need to spend X amount of, we figure out how much data do we need to go through? How big of a problem, and what is their goal? Obviously we need to know what we're looking to fix. Is it, drop off in sales? Is it their brand? People aren't really following, like they're not growing the way they thought they would, or they are getting customer feedback and it's not good in these certain areas, but they don't have no clue why. It's that process of discovery, figuring out, okay, well, what is it you want to have happen? You think there's a problem, but what do you want to have happen? Do you want us to fix it? Do you want more sales? Do you want more current customers to spend more money? Do you want new customers? What is the actual goal of digging through this?
Right.
And then going through that process of going through all their data, going through what they have, looking at their processes, and seeing what's there and identifying, all right, well, now we know it. Now we can tell you, here's points of issue. There's an issue in the user experience, and here's the points that we see, and here's our recommendation on which ones to fix. So it's definitely part of our process. If they don't know, we can dig through the data if they don't want to do it themselves, and figure out, here's what we should be focusing on, and here's the top 3 things that would make the most impact right now, and then we can do those, get your sales back up, and then work on fixing the rest long term. So it's also creating that strategy of what to fix, when to fix it, and what can their team handle in terms of fixing certain pieces.
So in terms of impact, are you basing that off of data within the company? I'm assuming that the impact would be somewhat measurable in terms of things like response time or bottom line self-revenue.
Yeah, so it goes back to their goals. If it's response time, if they're having a bad response time to customer inquiries or customer support, or is it, people are leaving because of how messaging is, or things just confusing people to the point where they don't even use a product. They pay for it and they don't use it. And that's, the point is to use it. So it's figuring out what those metrics are, and then based on those goals, we basically work backwards and go, okay, well, if your goal is in 1 year to be doing this in this area, okay, well, that's our goal. Now we work backwards and we look at what is happening that's blocking us from making that happen, and that's what we fix. So it's totally dependent on their metrics. I try not to put our own metrics of success on our clients, because that doesn't work. I have one metric I could use, but honestly, there's hundreds of different ways to look at success, and different problems, issues are different between companies. So it's all about what do you, the client, need, and what is your goals, and then we work backwards from that.
So, and I think I'm beginning to get a more of a holistic picture of how user experience and brand come together to work for a business's overall purpose and objectives. But is there anything else that we haven't covered, both from a user experience and brand perspective, in terms of aligning it to the company's overall objectives and core purpose, that we haven't covered as yet?
Uh, I don't think there's, I think we've covered all the high points really
Yeah.
of ensuring that connection between your core and your customers. You know, it's really just every touch point of a customer is a experience of theirs,
Mhm.
and the experience needs to mirror what you want to be giving them, and making sure that it is what you're giving them. And so, yeah, I think we've covered really the major points of contact.
Certainly. Would If I were to phrase what you do in another way, would human-centered design be another way to describe it?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
excellent. So, is there anything that I should have asked but haven't in terms of both cohesive branding or cohesive user experience?
No, I think we've done a good job of going through questions. There's nothing that I can think of right now that would be a major piece to add to this puzzle. I think it's really just, you know, making sure that user input is viewed at every point, and making sure that you're cohesive across that, and one user should really go through the whole process
Certainly.
and not isolating it. You know, I think that's really the key.
Right. What, in parting, would be your top tip to creating predictable B2B success?
Making sure that your experience, especially between sales, delivery, and the product, are a cohesive experience. You know, making sure that you should be looking at your own process, go through it yourself, and go through it start to finish. Don't skip a section because you think that, oh well, sales is sales and don't need to worry about that experience. You know, it's there is no experience that is trivial when you're talking about your customers deciding to stay with you or not. You know, every single email, every single message, your posts on your social media, you know, even if you think of it as part of your sales process, your current customers probably follow you on social media. So you can lose customers by having bad messaging there. And so just making sure that you really do look at every single component, and don't skip one because you think it's good enough or somebody said it was okay. Make sure
Certainly.
make sure it's good.
Certainly. Ian, where can someone listening to this head to in order to find out more and to maybe connect with you and ask a few questions?
Yeah, you can find us online at www.petermanfirm.com. And I personally, you can find me, Ian Peterman, on LinkedIn is probably the one I'm on the most. I do have profiles on Twitter, but not there much. So LinkedIn's definitely the best one to find me if you want to get a hold of me directly pretty easily.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ian.
Thank you so much, Vinay. Have a great day.